I'm looking again into James chapter number 2. We began there last time and discussing about those who wore fine raiment and how they were treated with more respect and positionally, and how they were invited to sit at the best places. And James is telling them that everyone is to be treated equally. And then I go down to verse number 10 of James chapter 2. Whosoever shall keep the whole law, and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. Whosoever shall keep the whole law, that means every part, and yet offend in one point, one principle, he is guilty of all. The idea that some laws are more important than others is not correct. They're all important to God, and to break one is to break them all. This was the problem with the Mosaic law system. They tried to separate it out and made into traditions and statutes and judgments, and trying to soften the blow, if you will, for someone who would break the law. But James is saying, you break one point, you have broke them all. You're guilty of all. You're guilty of the whole law. In verse 11, for he that said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not kill. Now if thou commit no adultery, yet if thou kill, thou art become a transgressor of the law. Again, there's not one point of the law that's more important than the other. They're all the same. So if you break one, you have broke them all. Now I want to go down and start with verse number 14 this evening, which is the basis of our main part of our lesson. What doth it profit? What good is it, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith, and have not works? Can faith save him? What good is it for someone to say, I have faith, but is not showing that faith? Okay? Now, there's two terms that are important for us to consider. One is faith. We understand that we are saved by grace through faith without works. Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, or 8 through 10, is a good representation of the fact that we are saved by grace through faith, and that not of yourselves, it's a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. So we know that works, doing things to be saved, is not what James is talking about. Now, there are those who claim that works is the instrument by which someone comes to know Christ. And that's not true either. Because works is for the saved. Faith is for the lost and the saved. We are saved by grace through faith. Without works, without anything on our part. And yet we are called upon as Christian folk to work. Because we will be judged according to our works, not according to our faith. So can faith save him? Faith alone. Now, again, remember James is the one that's trying to get them to understand the importance of showing their faith, living their faith, that others might see. So many today try to hide their faith, and all they end up doing is compromising what they think they believe and hurting themselves more than anything else. But we are called upon to live our faith. James gives an example. If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto him, Depart in peace, be thou warmed and filled, notwithstanding, ye give them not those things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? Someone would come to your house hungry, and you would tell them, you may go and be warmed and filled, it says here. And yet they're still hungry. What doth it profit? What good is it? Okay? Many years ago, there used to be people who traveled by train, and when I say traveled by train, they would get into the freight cars or wherever they could on the train. And when the train would stop, sometimes they'd get off for a little while, and they would go, and they would search for a house and go to that house asking if they could have something to eat. If that homeowner or that person in the house gave them food to eat, something to drink, then they would go out and they would mark that house with something on the ground that other people traveling the same way they were would see it and know that this particular family will give you something to eat. Also, if I went to a house and they said, go away, stay away from us, then that house, they would not put that stones there because they knew they would not receive any food. So that's how they marked those houses. Well, as Christian folk, when someone would come to the door, they would ask for food. What are we supposed to do? Okay? Are we supposed to tell them that, I'm sorry about your situation. I hope you find something to eat. We'll see you later? Or do you give them something to eat? James is saying, if we're going to show our faith, then we will provide for them. There was a circumstance one time, long time ago, when a man came. I was visiting some friends, and a man came to the door asking for food. It wasn't too far from the railroad track, so I could assume that maybe he was traveling, maybe he was walking. I didn't ask. But he said, do you have anything to eat? They had a picnic table there over to the side, and I said, well, sit down there, and we'll get you something to eat. And of course, some lunch meat, a lunch meat sandwich, some chips, a drink. And he was very appreciative of it. Okay? By these things, we are acting out our faith. We are trying to help those in need. So James, again, is asking the question, is your faith a living faith that causes you to act, or is it one that he calls dead? In verse 17, even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead being alone. It is not operating, it is not working, it is not alive. Okay? Faith is an action word that we put into practice. There is the term the faith, which means that system of teaching. Galatians 4 and verse 5. One Lord, one faith, one baptism. There is saving faith, as in Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. And that is the kind of faith that causes one to be born again. And there is the living faith, believing and acting upon what we believe. And that word, of course, as I've said before, is the word pistis, P-I-S-T-I-S. It is the living faith. It is the action faith. Okay? That causes one to do what they believe. Now, we teach here the importance of church attendance. It's important for God's people to meet together for worship, for the sharing of the Word of God, for the education of the membership, so that they can take with them into the world principles that will help them live their faith in front of others. Why do we do that? Because a living faith is a faith that is in action. Now, sometimes people like to hide their faith. You remember Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, who hid their faith because they were afraid to show it. Then in John 19 is when they finally, something happened that brought them out. And that when they asked for the body of Jesus. But they hid their faith for fear of the Jews. They hid their faith because they did not want to be the objects of ridicule, and they would have lost their position within the Sanhedrin. And so they hid their faith. Well, that is a dead faith. When faith is hidden, when we stand by quietly and no one knows who we are, if someone would ask, do you go to church? And we would say, maybe once in a while. A young man told us one time, as we were having devotions, he said that he met this girl and he wanted to arrange a date with her. So he went up to her and asked her if she would be interested in going out on a date with him. And she turned to him and she said, I only date Christian boys. And he was a member of one of our churches. I only date Christian boys. His faith was hidden, and that shook him pretty good. That shook him pretty good. He did not realize. Sometimes we don't realize that our actions can hide our faith. But our faith needs to be lived. It is dead being alone. Now, verse 18, yea, a man may say, Thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. That's, if someone is hiding their faith, you don't know if they're saved or not. The only way we have to know if a person is born again is by the fruit that they produce. We're not judges here. I'm not going to stand here and say, well, I think this person's saved and this person's lost. We can't do that. But we can, as the old preachers used to say, we can be fruit inspectors. What is their life like? What are they doing with their life? Are they showing their faith, or are they hiding their faith? Okay? I will show thee my faith by my works. 2 Corinthians chapter number 5. Okay, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, starting with verse number 6. Therefore we are always confident, knowing that while we are at home in the body and absent from the Lord, for we walk by faith, not by sight. Okay, we walk